Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a fascinating game between Slip for 19 playing white and OngoleBull with black. Both players are around the 1580 rating mark, so this is a great example of solid, classical development with some instructive moments in the opening. Let's jump right in and see what's going on. White kicks things off with e4, staking a claim in the center. This is textbook opening play, aiming to control the critical central squares and open lines for the queen and bishop. Black responds symmetrically with e5, matching white's central presence and setting the stage for a classical battle. White develops the knight to f3, attacking black's e5 pawn and preparing to castle kingside. This is a fundamental principle. Develop pieces toward the center and prepare king safety. Black mirrors with nc6, defending the e5 pawn and developing a piece. So far, both sides are following classical opening principles. White brings out the bishop to c4, targeting the vulnerable f7 square, which is often a focal point in many openings. This move also helps control the center indirectly. Black responds with bc5, developing the bishop to an active diagonal and contesting white's bishop. This symmetrical setup is very common in the Italian game. White plays d3, a solid move supporting the e4 pawn and preparing to develop the dark squared bishop. This is a more restrained approach compared to the aggressive d4 thrust, aiming for a slow build-up. Black develops the knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn and preparing to castle. This move also pressures white's center and adds flexibility. White continues development with nc3, reinforcing control over the d5 and e4 squares. This knight also supports potential central breaks later on. Black plays d6, solidifying the e5 pawn and creating a strong pawn chain. This move also opens lines for the dark squared bishop. White plays h3, a prophylactic move preventing black's bishop or knight from pinning the knight on f3 or coming to g4. This is a subtle but useful move to maintain flexibility. Black replies with h6, mirroring white's idea to stop any white pieces from occupying g5. Both sides are carefully preventing annoying pins or attacks. White develops the bishop to e3, aiming to exchange off black's active bishop on c5 or support the d4 push in the future. This move also connects the rooks. Black seizes the moment to play bd4, aggressively placing the bishop in the center and challenging white's bishop on e3. This move slightly improves black's position by increasing central tension and forcing a decision. White captures on d4 with b takes d4, exchanging bishops. This simplifies the position and removes black's strong centralized bishop. Black recaptures with nxd4, activating the knight in the center and maintaining pressure. This knight is well placed, eyeing key squares like c2 and f3. White takes back with nxd4, keeping material balanced and maintaining central presence. Black captures with e takes d4, opening the e-file and creating a pawn majority in the center. This move also frees the light squared bishop and opens lines for black's pieces. White repositions the knight to na2, a flexible move aiming to reroute the knight to better squares like g3 or c1 to support central or kingside play. This also clears the c3 square for potential pawn breaks. Black pushes c5, solidifying the d4 pawn and gaining space on the queenside. This move also restricts white's b4 advance and prepares for queenside expansion. White challenges black's pawn chain with b4, trying to undermine black's control of the queenside and open lines for the rook and bishop. This is a thematic pawn break in these structures. Black responds with b6, reinforcing the c5 pawn and preparing to fianchetto or develop the bishop to b7. This move keeps the queenside solid. White pushes a4, supporting the b4 pawn and aiming to further challenge black's queenside structure. This is a logical continuation of white's plan to open lines. Black castles kingside with 0-0, prioritizing king safety and connecting the rooks. This is a natural and important step before launching any further operations. White plays b5, pushing the pawn forward to challenge black's queenside structure. This is a classic thematic move when you have space on the queenside. It aims to fix black's pawns and potentially open lines for the rook on a1. By advancing b5, white is trying to cramp black's position and create weaknesses on the queenside. Black responds with bishop e6, developing the bishop to a central square and contesting white's bishop on c4. Here, black missed a stronger alternative with bishop b7, which would have put pressure on white's center and supported the queenside pawns more effectively. The key idea behind bishop b7 would be to control the long diagonal and increase activity, while bishop e6 is a bit more passive and allows white to simplify favorably. White immediately captures with bishop takes e6, exchanging bishops. This is a good decision because it removes black's active bishop and leaves black with doubled pawns after recapture. White's bishop pair advantage is a strategic plus here, especially as the position opens up. Black recaptures with f takes e6. This pawn capture opens the f-file for black's rook but also weakens black's pawn structure, leaving doubled e-pawns that can become targets. The key takeaway here is that structural weaknesses often come with dynamic compensation. In this case, black gains open lines but must be careful about pawn weaknesses. White castles kingside with short castling, ensuring king safety and connecting the rooks. This is a natural move and a critical step before launching any central or kingside operations. Black pushes e5, advancing the pawn to challenge white's center and gain space. This move is thematic, trying to break open the position and activate black's pieces, especially the light-squared bishop and queen. White responds with f4, contesting the e5 pawn and aiming to maintain central tension. The key idea here is to prevent black from easily breaking through and to keep the center closed enough to leverage white's bishop pair. Black captures with e takes f4, opening the e-file and forcing white to react. This move shifts the pawn structure and gives black a slight material edge, as black now has an extra pawn in the center. White recaptures with knight takes f4, bringing the knight into an active central square. This is a good move because the knight eyes key squares like d5 and e6, and it supports potential kingside attacks. Black plays queen d7, connecting the rooks and preparing to double on the f-file or support a kingside push. This is a flexible move that keeps options open for black's pieces. White responds with queen d2, also connecting rooks and preparing to support the knight or push c4. This move keeps white's options open for both defense and attack. Black doubles rooks with rook f7, preparing to contest the f-file and increase pressure on white's kingside. This is a logical build-up move, aiming to leverage the open f-file. White pushes c4, challenging black's pawn chain and trying to open lines on the queenside. This is a thematic pawn break to undermine black's central control and create targets. Black responds with rook af8, doubling rooks on the f-file and increasing pressure. This move supports black's plan to invade on the f-file and potentially create tactical threats. White pushes a5, gaining space on the queenside and fixing black's pawn structure. This move aims to restrict black's pawn breaks and prepare for further expansion. Black plays knight h7, repositioning the knight. However, this was a missed opportunity. Black could have captured on a5 with b takes a5, which would have opened lines and created more active play on the queenside. The knight move is more passive and doesn't challenge white's queenside grip immediately. White centralizes the knight with knight d5, placing it on a strong outpost. This knight is very well placed, eyeing key squares and restricting black's pieces. Black initiates a tactical sequence with rook takes f1 check, exchanging rooks and forcing white's king to recapture. This is a critical moment because black is trying to simplify into a position where the extra pawn and active pieces will matter more. White captures back with rook takes f1, maintaining material balance but giving black the open f-file. Black doubles down with rook takes f1 check, forcing another exchange of rooks. This sequence favors black as it removes white's rook and increases black's control over the open file. White captures the rook with king takes f1, bringing the king into the center but losing the right to castle. This is a necessary evil to avoid losing material but slightly weakens white's king safety. Black captures on a5 with b takes a5, finally opening the queenside. This move creates a passed pawn and increases black's activity on the queenside. White recaptures with queen takes a5, keeping pressure on black's queenside pawns and maintaining material balance. Black plays knight f6, repositioning the knight to a more active square. However, this was another missed opportunity. Black could have played knight f8, which would have better defended key squares and prepared to support the pawns and king safety more effectively. The knight on f6 is active but less flexible than on f8 in this position. White pushes b6, advancing the pawn to challenge black's queenside structure. This move looks natural, trying to create a passed pawn or at least fix black's pawns on the queenside. However, here white missed a tactical opportunity with knight takes f6 check. Why is that important? Well, capturing on f6 would have forced black's king or rook to recapture, potentially disrupting black's coordination and opening lines for white's queen or knight to infiltrate. Instead, by pushing the pawn, white commits to a slow plan that black can easily neutralize. The key idea here is to always look for forcing moves like captures or checks before pushing pawns in critical positions. Black calmly captures back with a takes b6. This is a straightforward response, removing the passed pawn threat and maintaining material balance. Notice how black's pawn structure remains solid, and the open a file could become useful later. White recaptures with knight takes b6, taking the pawn and centralizing the knight. This move is logical, but it doesn't create any immediate threats. White's knight is active but somewhat vulnerable on b6, especially with black's queen and pawns nearby. Black responds with queen c7, repositioning the queen to a more flexible square. This move supports the c5 pawn and eyes the d6 and b6 squares, putting indirect pressure on white's knight. White checks with queen a8 check, forcing black's king to move. This is a useful forcing move that gains a tempo, but it doesn't change the evaluation much because black's king can simply step aside safely. Black moves the king to king h7, sidestepping the check. This is the only safe square, keeping the king out of immediate danger and ready to support black's pawns. White brings the knight back to knight d5, centralizing it again. This knight move aims to control key central squares and possibly threaten black's queen or pawns. Black captures the knight with knight takes d5. This is a critical exchange that benefits black because it removes white's active knight and simplifies the position. Black gains a material edge here, as white's knight was a key attacking piece. White recaptures with queen takes d5, taking back the knight. This keeps the material balanced but leaves white's queen somewhat exposed in the center. Black retreats the queen to queen d8, a solid defensive move. This move supports the pawn on d6 and prepares to reposition the queen to more active squares. White pushes e5, trying to open lines and challenge black's pawn structure. This is a thematic break aiming to create weaknesses or open files for white's queen. Black checks with queen f8 check, forcing white's king to move. This is a useful forcing move that keeps white's king slightly uncomfortable and restricts white's options. White moves the king to king g1, stepping out of check. This is the natural square, maintaining king safety and preparing to support the center. Black captures on e5 with d takes e5. This move opens the d-file and increases black's central control. Black is now ahead by a pawn and has a more active position. White recaptures with queen takes e5, maintaining material balance. White's queen is active in the center but faces pressure from black's pieces. Black moves the king to king h8, a quiet but important move. This improves king safety by stepping off the g-file and preparing to bring the rook or queen into more active roles. White plays g3, trying to create luft for the king and prevent back rank threats. However, this move is a slight misstep. Better was h4, which would have been more aggressive in gaining space and restricting black's queen. The key idea here is that pawn moves around the king should balance between safety and activity. Black shifts the queen to queen c8. This is a flexible move, but black missed a stronger alternative with queen f3, which would have put immediate pressure on white's kingside pawns and created mating threats. The lesson here is to always look for active, aggressive queen placements in the endgame to maximize pressure. White moves the king to king h2, stepping away from potential checks. This is a safe and natural move to avoid tactics. Black returns the queen to queen f8, maintaining pressure along the f-file. This move keeps options open for checks and infiltration. White pushes h4, trying to gain space and create luft. This move is a bit slow and allows black to maintain the initiative. Black checks with queen f2 check, forcing white's king to respond. This is a strong forcing move that keeps white on the defensive. White moves the king to king h3, stepping into the attack but trying to avoid immediate threats. Black follows up with queen f1 check, continuing the attack with a check. This sequence highlights black's active queen and the importance of keeping the king exposed in the endgame. White plays king g4, stepping the king up the board. This move looks natural, trying to escape checks and perhaps support the queen or pawns. However, the engine points out that king h2 would have been better here. Why? Because king h2 keeps the king safer on the back rank and avoids stepping into potential checks or pins along the g-file. The key idea here is that in the endgame, king safety remains critical, especially when queens are on the board. Black responds with queen takes d3, capturing the pawn on d3. This is a strong move, increasing black's material advantage and opening lines for the pawn on d4 to advance. Black now has a clear plan to push the passed pawn and create unstoppable threats. White captures back with queen takes c5, taking the pawn on c5. Unfortunately, this move allows black to maintain a strong initiative. The evaluation drops further here because white's queen is now more exposed and less able to defend critical squares. A better alternative might have been to focus on king safety or blockading black's pawns instead of capturing here. Black checks with queen e4 check, forcing white's king to respond. This is a textbook example of using checks to keep the opponent's king exposed and limit their options. Black's queen is dominating the board, and white is struggling to find safe squares. White retreats the king to king h3. This move tries to step out of the check while staying close to the queen and pawns. But notice how white's king is becoming a target rather than a defender. This is a dangerous sign in the endgame. Black pushes d3, advancing the passed pawn. This is a critical strategic moment. The key idea here is that passed pawns in the endgame are incredibly powerful, especially when supported by the queen. Black's pawn on d3 threatens to promote soon, forcing white to react defensively. White checks with queen c8 check, trying to create counterplay. However, this move is a missed opportunity. The engine suggests queen f8 check would have been much stronger. Why? Because queen f8 check would have forced black's king into a more passive position and possibly allowed white to gain time to block the passed pawn or coordinate better defense. Instead, queen c8 check allows black to calmly sidestep and continue the advance. Black moves the king to king h7, escaping the check. This is a safe square, keeping the king close to the action and ready to support the advancing pawn. White pushes c5, trying to create counter threats on the queen side. But again, this is a missed chance. The engine suggests queen d7 would have been better, aiming to control key squares and possibly blockade the pawn on d3. The lesson here is that in such positions, it's often more effective to use the queen actively to stop passed pawns rather than pushing your own pawns prematurely. Black pushes h5, advancing the kingside pawn. This move supports black's king and creates luft, but the engine points out that d2 would have been stronger, pushing the passed pawn closer to promotion immediately. This shows how critical it is to prioritize passed pawn advancement in the endgame. White moves the king to king h2, stepping back to safety. This is a natural move, but by now white is under heavy pressure and struggling to find active counterplay. Black pushes d2, marching the pawn to the brink of promotion. This is a decisive strategic moment. The key idea here is that a passed pawn on the 7th rank, supported by the queen, is almost unstoppable. White must find a way to block or capture, but options are limited. White plays queen d8, trying to stop the pawn promotion. However, this is a critical mistake. The engine suggests queen d7 would have been much better, maintaining pressure on the pawn and keeping options open to block or trade queens. By moving to d8, white allows black to execute a forced mating sequence. The takeaway here is that in these endgames, precise queen placement to control promotion squares is vital. Black responds with queen c2, attacking and preparing to promote. The engine notes that queen e2 check would have been even stronger, delivering a check that forces white's king into a worse position and accelerates mate. Black's queen is perfectly coordinated with the passed pawn, demonstrating the power of queen and pawn cooperation in the endgame. White pushes c6, trying to create counterplay by advancing the pawn. But this is too little, too late. The engine suggests king g1 would have been better, moving the king away from checks and preparing to defend more actively. This position teaches us that sometimes, advancing pawns without proper support or timing can be futile against a coordinated attack. Black promotes with d1 equals q+, delivering a check and creating an overwhelming material advantage. Interestingly, the engine says promoting to a rook with d1 equals r+ would have been even stronger, as it forces white's king into a mating net more quickly. This subtlety shows how even the choice of promotion piece can be critical in forced mate sequences. Alright, let's wrap this up. This endgame phase teaches us some crucial lessons. First, king safety remains paramount even in the endgame, especially with queens on the board. Second, passed pawns supported by the queen are incredibly powerful and often decisive. Third, precise queen placement to control promotion squares and deliver checks can make or break the game. And finally, always be mindful of the timing and coordination between your pawns and queen. Pushing pawns too early or without support can backfire. Both players missed some key defensive and offensive resources here, but Black's superior coordination and passed pawn strategy ultimately sealed the deal. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fun and instructive chess content. Keep practicing those endgames, they're where games are won and lost. See you next time.